All right, groovy baby. We're in the 1970s. What's going on in the 1970s? Well, at the end of the 1970s, the most awesome dude in the world was born. That would be this guy, Mr. Sela. But there was a lot of things going on in the 1970s besides that. Society was changing. The population was changing in the 1970s. Most immigrants now start coming from Latin America and Asia. We have a lot more people coming into this country from those areas. The birth rates decline. Remember that stagflation thing we were talking about? Well, the economy's not doing so good in the 1970s. We have a lot of labor union disputes. We have a lot of people protesting, a lot of people losing money, not making very much money. So what happens is the birth rate declines. A lot of people stop having children because, they can't afford it that much anymore. So by 1970, check that out. Americans 65 and older become one of the fastest growing groups. People are living longer because thanks to technology and medical improvements. But now our senior citizens are becoming the fastest growing population groups. In America, we're facing new challenges. Remember those old challenges that we were talking about, the Equal Rights Amendment? People were debating it, women specifically, women fighting women on equal rights, and that fails. In 1972, we have the Title IX ban discrimination on basis on sex in federally funded educational programs. And in 73, the Supreme Court legalizes abortion with the decision of Roe versus Wade. So we have a lot of women's rights being affected here. We've made all this progress through the 50s and the 60s, and now in the 1970s, things just start coming to a halt in the 1970s, and society in America really starts to change. And the first couple of things that we're going to discuss here, besides the ERA and legalizing abortion with Roe versus Wade, we're going to get into things like affirmative action. We're going to get into things like environmental awareness. So we'll go over affirmative action first. Americans go back and forth. They debate affirmative action for quite a while. It's the practice of giving special consideration to non-whites. Okay, so non-whites or women to make up for past discriminations. The U.S. government felt that because of all these years, starting with slavery and then going through Jim Crow era and going through everything like that, that the white man has pretty much, just been running everything, right? So it's this consideration to give non-whites, which includes everybody non-white or women, to make up for past discriminations. A lot of supporters argued that it needed to improve educational and job opportunities for minorities and women because there just weren't very minorities and women in lots of businesses, lots of high up in businesses too. And opponents insisted that race or gender-based preferences were unfair. They felt that if they were more qualified than the non-white or the woman, they should get the job. What do you think? I mean, affirmative action is a touchy subject. Should businesses have something like a quota that says we should have a certain amount of women or we should have a certain amount of non-whites here? Or do you feel that if you qualify for the job better, that you should be able to get it? See, it's a touchy situation. 1970s was a touchy situation for Americans, especially as you can see here. Now we have equal rights failing, so women have a downfall. Title IX banned discrimination of sex federally funded programs, so that's good. So, Roe versus Wade legalizing abortion, that's an opinion thing. So you have a good, a bad, and you have an opinion, and now you have affirmative action, which again causes more debate. But we have Earth Day coming in the 1970s, so that's good. Rachel Carlson writes a book in the 1970s that that lets people know about environmental issues like pollution and acid rain and erosion on the world. So on April 22nd, 1970, we finally start celebrating Earth Day, the same Earth Day we celebrate today. And Congress starts passing these laws to limit the release of pollutants like CFCs and hairspray. But you need to know probably one of the best things that Richard Nixon is known for, because you went through Watergate last time and how he totally bombed it, He is known for creating the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, still around today, and it still does the same things like enforcing environmental legislation. These are the guys that get involved when anything has to do with oil spills and everything like that. The EPA is involved because they're the guys who are dealing with the environment. And these guys debate on balancing business environmental concerns. That's what it says down here at the bottom here. I don't know why it keeps cutting it off. Debates on balancing business and environmental concerns. That's what the EPA does. So now we're talking about getting the environment mixed in with the government. So how do we do that? Because, you know, we're a coal-burning country. That's what we do. We burn coal. And coal burning destroys the environment. Well, in 1976, still pre-Mr. Sela, Jimmy Carter is elected president. He is the president that's elected when I am born. I am born in 1978. So Jimmy Carter becomes president. He's a peanut farmer from Georgia. Many people think that he couldn't become president because, heck, he was just a peanut farmer from Georgia, right? And some of the things that he faces that sluggish economy, that stagflation, that high unemployment, high inflation, high oil prices. He really starts to, he becomes president at a really, really rough time. He can't get Congress to agree with anything. He can't get them to support any of his proposals. He's got everybody against him. Poor Jimmy Carter lasts only one term, but maybe it was the best for the country. One thing Carter did push for was nuclear energy. He wanted to solve all this coal burning, destroying the environment, give me a cheaper way to get energy. And he's really behind nuclear energy. However, at 3 Mile Island, which was a nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania, they had an accident there, and they had like a partial meltdown, and nuclear waste was kind of spewed into the environment, right? And it didn't really do well for the people sitting around there. A lot of people around there started getting cancers who lived within a certain radius, started getting cancers and everything like that, because nuclear energy is poisonous. And nobody would build new reactors until the mid-1980s. So this is what he's trying to do to offset all that power problems. Now we have to get into figure out what successes and failures Jimmy Carter had, because, you know, he had some, but he didn't have many. He favored these policies that promoted human rights. You need to know what human rights are, the basic rights and freedoms of all people. He does things like reducing U.S. aid to former allies that committed human rights violations, so they shouldn't be getting any money or food from the Americans. He works to pressure the South African government into ending its apartheid, which is a system of laws requiring racial segregation. But doesn't it sound like that was going on in the United States? Laws that required racial segregation? They call it apartheid, right? So if we try to end that, he calls for sanctions, for economic penalties to encourage reform. Look at that sign. Natives, Indians, and coloreds. If you enter these premises at night, you will be listed as missing. Armed guards shoot on sight. Savage dogs devoured the corpses. Okay, that's pretty crazy. Those signs were up in some places. So he really favors human rights. What does he do with Latin America and the Soviet Union? Well, he signs treaties that would transfer the Panama Canal to Panama by the year 2000. That affects Americans. Americans really, really get upset at this. They want the Panama Canal. His relations with the Soviet Union, remember that detente that Nixon set up with the Soviets? Well, that breaks down. The Soviets invade Afghanistan in 1979, and Carter broke off his arms talks and refused to allow athletes in the Olympics of 1980. They boycotted the Olympics of 1980, which means no Americans can go over there and participate in the Olympics. Carter signed SALT II, which is the same as SALT with Nixon, but citizens felt that, Carter was just selling out to the Soviets. Carter was having a rough time. His foreign policy wasn't very good. His domestic policy wasn't very good. Look at this pin up here. Panama Canal can't be defended, so I'm giving it away. Forget my sworn oath of office to defend the United States. Vote out Carter. And you can't, I don't know if you can see this right here, but this is like one of those wind-up things on the back of a doll, wind him up and he's just going to go ahead and say what you want him to say. Many people didn't like Jimmy Carter. They thought he was a weak president. He gives away control of the Panama Canal, which loses billions of dollars a year for Americans. And he signed SALT II with the Russians, talking about more nuclear programs. The Soviets invade Afghanistan. He doesn't do very much. And the last part you have to know about Jimmy Carter is the most important thing that probably happened during his presidency, and this is what was going on in the Middle East. Carter works to ease the tensions between the Middle East. In '78, he helps Egypt and Israel reach a peace agreement in the Camp David Accords, which is good. But what goes on next is really what Jimmy Carter is known for, unfortunately. In '79, a bunch of rebels overthrew the Shah, which was the king of Iran, and established an Islamic fundamental dictatorship. And in November of that year, a group of Iranian students attacked the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, which was the capital, and seized over 60 hostages. This is what's later to become known as the Iran hostage crisis. It lasts for about 383 days off the top of my head, but it's well over a year that it lasts. And Carter tries to get him out, and he couldn't in 1980, so many Americans start losing faith in Carter as a president. He only lasts for 4 years, and then coming up next is the president that many Americans believe is the heart and soul of the Republican Party, Ronald Reagan. So don't forget the things that were pretty much non-existent in Carter's dictatorship, in Carter's presidency. It wasn't very good. Dictatorships in the West or in the East are growing, falling apart with the Soviets. They're invading Afghanistan, and the Iranian hostage crisis starts going bad, and, Reagan even makes them look worse. So there you go. We're going to come up to the 1980s coming up next.